What was the most surprising thing you learned about doing a deal with a billionaire?
Oh, the speed at which they move is insane. It was interesting. Through Business Leader, I got to meet and work with several billionaires and multi-millionaires. We built a company from 1 million to 12 million so that's 20 million in today's money.
That's rapid growth.
Yes, huge growth.
Okay, I've got a plan to scale this. What are the first 5 things you're looking at where you're going to start investing?
The first thing is so that's absolutely the first thing, because that's the bit most business leaders and entrepreneurs fail on.
How important then in the scale up piece is having a real understanding of sales?
That's just the 3 elements that I always look at. And if a business isn't growing, it's because of one of those 3 isn't working properly.
Welcome along to today's podcast. Super excited for the conversation we're going to have today. Somebody who I've got to know has become a great kind of friend and somebody I've learned so much from. So really excited to share with you today. Andrew Scott, who's with us, the founder and CEO of the Ascot Group.
Delighted to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. A multi-million-pound portfolio of companies in marketing, tech, media, home improvement. That I didn't realize that one, and property, which I knew about. Yeah. You've what I love about your story is, you've built and sold multiple businesses, overcome massive adversity. You give back on a huge level, and there's so much I want to talk to you about around that, and the way you've bounced back from personal adversity as well as business adversity twice, which we will talk about it. I think kind of one of my favorite quotes from you I read was how you've gone from trauma to tycoon, which I kind of really liked as a soundbite. Fair play to the person who wrote that about you. I thought that was really brilliant. And obviously a few years ago you sold the Business Leader magazine.
Yes.
And we are going to ask and delve into some of the lessons and questions about that. And I think the first thing for me is like, what you and I, funnily enough, it's a really interesting story because you and I met or connected through LinkedIn initially.
That's right. Yeah.
Do you remember?
Yeah.
Like you initially, because at the time you were running the Scale Up Business Awards.
Yes.
Which I was dead jealous of, if I'm honest, right? I was really jealous I hadn't decided to do that, and you'd done it first.
Yeah.
And I think you messaged me and said, was I running a conference around scale ups at the time?
Right.
And I think it's a really interesting full circle moment because that was just before we were about to do the first Scale Up Summit.
Yeah.
And obviously this year, and one of the reasons we wanted to get you on the podcast before is that you're the kickoff speaker for this year's Scale Up Summit. So kind of like 3 years in the making to have you on stage. So I'm like, that's kind of really an interesting sort of full circle moment for me. So I want to go back and go, you obviously came to the UK in your 20s, correct?
Yeah, 18. 18, yeah.
You came here with like nothing, right? No connections.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, no money, no education.
Yeah.
Didn't have an O-level to my name. Yeah.
So what was the first biggest you talk a lot about imposter syndrome, and I think it's something that most entrepreneurs struggle with on some level. Yeah. So let's talk, when you came here to the UK, obviously, what was the first thing you struggled with from an imposter syndrome point of view? What was the first thing you found you had to overcome?
I think it was my accent. Coming from Ireland to England, I stood out like a sore thumb. So I think that, that ability to fit in and connect and make friends with other people, I found really, really difficult. And then trying to build a career from that background of not having money, connections, resources or whatever, and actually just trying to get on the career ladder, get a job and build a career. I think it was really difficult. I mean, to start off with, I rented somebody's garage, a lady's garage, which she had semi-converted it to a bedsit.
Right.
And it was in a magnificent house, at the back of this magnificent house. So I had a tiny little, just a room with a toilet and sink in it.
Right.
But that gave me just the start that I needed, because I liked this old lady. She lived on her own in this huge property, and she was just a lovely old lady. So I helped around a bit. I helped her with the gardening, and I guess my first break actually came from that. My first business break came from that because she also owned the house next door, and the house next door she had rented out to the same family for 25 years.
Wow.
And they were moving abroad, so she was about to rent out the house again. And I approached her and said, look, I'd really like to rent the house. And she just laughed at me and said, Andrew, you couldn't afford the rent. I mean, your salary wouldn't cover the rent. I said, well, look, if you let me have it, I'll look after the place. I'll do the garden. I'll look after your garden. I'll be next door. I'll be on hand for you as well. And I'll just rent out another couple of the rooms. So she thought about it and came back and said, okay, I'll do you a deal, she said, which is if you come and have a little whiskey with me every Wednesday evening for half an hour after work, you can rent this house out. And the rent should have been $600 a month then, and she rented it to me for $200 a month. And that was a £1 million house. And that really was the start. It was in a place called Brick and Wood near St Albans.
Yeah, I know where that is, yeah.
Beautiful
part of the world.
Area.
Yeah.
And I then rented the other 3 rooms out for £200 a month each. So I ended up making more money from property than I actually did from my job at that time.
So you were really running an HMO before HMOs. Anyone even talks about it as a strategy,
exactly,
right?
That's it. Yeah, or rent to rent.
Yeah, any of that.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
way before it was kind of fashionable, trendy, or as a business model.
Yeah.
Did that sort of give you an insight into the power of leverage, or the fact that you didn't need to sort of own the asset, you just needed to control the asset?
Yeah. There's a couple of important lessons there for me. One was I rented the rooms out to people that were a similar age to myself.
Okay.
And what I found really different is that coming from Ireland, this was a new start to me and a massive opportunity. And in England, we didn't have all the issues that we had in Belfast in those days. So the opportunities were everywhere. I could see them everywhere. And the people that were renting the rooms from me were my age, but they had had a good upbringing and they didn't have that desire or that drive. They much preferred to go down to the pub after work. They much preferred to go out over the weekends, playing computer games, whatever it was in those days. And I couldn't understand it because all I wanted to do was work and build and be somebody. And they were quite happy plodding along. And I realized that was the difference with, having an unusual background, perhaps turning up in effectively a new country, creating an opportunity and just absolutely going for it. So from a very young age, I just wanted to build a really great career.
Do you think there's a lot of power in shifting environments like that? Because I think sometimes if you're born into a certain country, certain place, you tend not to see the opportunities as easy as if someone turns up from another part of the world. And I think that's why I'm a great believer in travel and get out of your environment, go elsewhere, because I think that gives you perspective that you don't have if that's all you've known.
Yeah, 100%. I equate it to taking an acorn and planting it in a pot. No matter what happens, that oak tree will only grow to a certain size. You take the same acorn, you plant it in a field, and it'll become a giant oak tree. So it's the same acorn. Change the environment, and you change the outcome.
Yep.
So I was a very firm believer in that from very early on, and your environment now would be the content that you're consuming.
True.
Online. It would be the friends that you have, the people that are around you, and sometimes actually the people that care about you the most sometimes are the people that hold you back, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think that can be difficult. I think it's one of the hardest things about when you start to, build a grown-up business or you're scaling up your business. I think there are people who have been with you for a long time who can't go on the journey mentally with you.
100%.
And I think that's, certainly the conversations with people I've coached over the years, I think it's one of the hardest things people find is, like, when do you know when to let go of people like that? Like, how have you known when a relationship has kind of reached the end of its time? How have you navigated that?
I had somebody, a supplier, I was negotiating to buy my first business, I think, and one of the suppliers to that business gave me some advice, and he said, Andrew, just bear in mind one thing: the people who join you at the start of that journey, there's a very high probability they won't be with you at the end of the journey. And I thought, no, absolutely not. I've got my team; they're awesome, we're strong, we're tight, we're brilliant.
Yep.
And he was absolutely right. So none of that original team were with me at the end of that business.
Do you find that hard? Do you find it hard if people, because I think we sometimes want it more for people around us than they want it for themselves.
100%. Again, one lesson that I learned very early on was that, you assume, because you're a business leader and you're driven, you assume other people are like that. And one of the mistakes I made early on was to push people that didn't necessarily want pushing. And I remember vividly taking on one person we had a call center, telesales center, and I remember promoting one of the telesales people, and they resigned 4 weeks later. Wow. So I called them in and said, look, you know what, I don't understand, we've just been promoted, you have a pay rise. And she said, Andrew, you forced me to do a job I never wanted to do. And I didn't even realize that during our interview process and conversations, I hadn't really picked up on the fact that actually all she wanted to do was turn up in the morning, make her calls, and go home at the end of the night. Yeah. So, that was a big lesson.
There's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that at all, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I think that's a good lesson in learning what aspiration. Everyone has a different level of aspiration.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think, I think it's really interesting because you were basically living in £1 million plus house, which in today's money is probably 10 million, right?
Yeah.
At 18. Yeah. Do you think that shaped your mindset around wealth, abundance, prosperity? Do you think it had a big impact on that?
Huge impact. Because again, your environment shapes who you are.
Right.
And when you're going home to £1 million house, and it's effectively yours, okay, you're renting it, but this is your home. And you're pulling up in the driveway and you're seeing your neighbours and you're seeing the cars they drive and you're getting to know them. And it has a huge impact to you because you're surrounding yourself with really successful people or really driven people, and it rubs off on you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a massive blessing for you. Forget the cash flow. I think the identity gift out of that was enormous, let alone the money. So what was the first business that you got really passionate about building?
Well, my first business that I set up was called ECS, Electronic Control Systems.
Right.
And I was 19 years old. And I was living in this house. And when I was at college or at Polytechnic, it was then, I learned electronics and I had an idea to develop a product that I thought was going to be absolutely amazing. Nowadays, what's it called?
Ring doorbell stuff.
Ring doorbell. That's it. And
$1 billion business, but
no, exactly. But when I was 18, I had this idea to make this product in the garage. So I bought components, and there was no video on it, but there was an intercom on it, and there was a button on it that would allow door entry to allow people to come in, which was ideal for people who weren't mobile. And it had a button that turned the outside intercom into an alarm. So I thought, this is genius. Nobody's ever done anything like this. So I designed the product, I bought the components, I assembled it, and I had no marketing budget. So I went around the doors, literally knocking doors, asking people if they'd like to buy this. And to fund it all, I'd had a bank overdraft, and I got called into the bank very quickly after 5 or 6 months. And the bank manager said, look, we see a lot of money going out. We're not seeing any coming in at all, so we're going to close the account. And I was absolutely devastated. And it turns out 6 months later, I hadn't sold one product. And I was absolutely devastated. And I had a garage full of them. And what was really interesting from that was the people around me, again, said, that's a great idea, Andrew. It's really innovative. You're a real entrepreneur. Get out there and do it. We're proud of you, son. Yeah. We're proud of you, brother. And what I hadn't really considered was the acid test, which is, will anybody actually buy this product?
Yeah.
So what I should have done is market testing to start with.
Do you think right product, wrong time? Because I think sometimes you can just be too early. I think if you look now, I'm very fortunate. I get to coach and work with the world's #1 door access control company, and work with them and their team. And that everything you're talking about now is access control panels, and they're on the walls and they're on the doors, and it's now ubiquitous. It's everywhere, right?
Yeah. And
but I just think sometimes entrepreneurs, you can have the right idea or see the right gap in the market, but be too early.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And actually, I repeated that mistake many years later on another project, which I'll maybe talk about later. But yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, the product was ugly as sin. So, I was definitely not a designer from the point of view of a beautiful product, but it was very functional. But the reality was, it was, nobody wanted it in those days. So yeah, maybe it was 20 years too early. And now everybody's got a ring or some sort of door entry system.
Yeah. I think two things for me. One is I've always believed and always said to people, look, if you've got an idea, go out and see 10 potential customers and actually do your sales pitch to 10 people and see if they will buy the product. Because if you do 10, first of all, two things are going to happen. One, when you do the pitch 10 times, you're going to get better at the pitch and you're going to learn what works and what doesn't work. Yeah. Two, you're going to find out whether people actually really want to give you money for this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter if people say to you, yeah, I'd buy that. It's like, okay, great, give me a check or give me the money. Like when people actually have to give you money for it, you're going to find out whether they were just being nice to you or whether it was real, right?
Yeah.
And I think that whole kind of like speed to market test and bootstrapping is a skill entrepreneurs. It's easy to scale up business when you've got money, and I've done it with money. I've raised capital, and I've done it without. But I think the lessons without are far more valuable. Actually,
100%,
far more valuable.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I have made that same mistake again. But it's interesting.
Just talk to us about that so it links. When did you make the same mistake again?
So I've got a business called Insight Data, and that provides prospect data, marketing data on UK industry. And in 2010, I developed a directory platform, which was designed in a way that it became almost a microsite for businesses,
right?
Where they could have all the company details on their products, accreditations, PR stories, downloadable product PDFs, video content, all of that. And I developed it. I brought in a software team and we built it in 2010. And one of the big drivers behind it was SEO, because way back, I was passionate about SEO way back before it was probably even a proper term. So I built this platform thinking that absolutely everybody would use it and everybody would go on it. And we couldn't sell it. Nobody understood it. So I had a whole sales team with a call center. Some people signed up to it, but it was tiny. So it was a big investment, 10 years too early, for sure. So getting that timing right, so you can have the best product in the world, but if your timing's wrong, and I think if I relaunched that product now and that service now, it would be a huge winner. But there's lots of other people in that space now.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good. I think for me, you normally entrepreneurs can see a gap in the market.
Yeah.
But actually, you've got to be aware of like how much money you need to go from, yes, it's a good idea and there's a gap into the market, to the market's actually caught up with you.
Yeah.
And I think that lag time sometimes catches really good entrepreneurs out, and they blame themselves for thinking, oh, it was me, where actually it was just you were just too early and you didn't have enough liquidity to ride it out, or you got to the market too early and nobody understood it.
Yeah.
Whereas 3 years later they would have completely understood it.
Actually, I think one of the challenges of entrepreneurs, by our very nature, we are chasing white rabbits all the time, because we're waking up in the middle of the night with an idea. We're seeing a new opportunity during the day. We're working with a customer, or we're working with our product team. Suddenly we see a new idea and we're off and we're chasing that new idea. And entrepreneurs by their nature are ideas people. And we're chasing these white rabbits all the time. And I think for me is the lesson from that is to fail fast for sure. So launch something, test it. And if it's not getting you the reaction that you want, then pull it fast. So we've recently launched a new business called TradePal, and it's a service for very small businesses and trades people, builders, joiners.
Okay.
And it's effectively a done-for-you marketing solution for very small businesses. And that's exactly what we did, which to what you alluded to. We tested it with 10 companies. First of all, sat down with 10 trades businesses and said, look, we're going to design this product. Do you want social media in it? Do you want your website in it? What would your preference be? And actually what was quite interesting there, a lot of them said, I have no idea, I don't know. I know we need something, but I don't know what it is. But the ones that could give us an answer, that helped us tailor the product. And then we launched it at a trade show about 10 days ago. And it was a huge success. I mean, we got to see the evidence yet turning into orders. But in terms of demand and interest in it, it was huge. So that ability to test and then iterate and tweak, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think the phrase I've kind of used, or I've used with clients, but I think it's probably not really understood actually, is product market fit. I think a lot of people go, oh yeah, we have product market fit, but do you really?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we like to think we have product market fit.
Yeah.
Where
Absolutely.
actually, if you've got to spend a lot of time, so there's a whole piece around 6 levels of awareness. But if the market isn't aware that they need your solution, then you're going to have quite a hard time marketing your solution.
Absolutely.
If they go, we're problem aware, but we're not aware that if they're not problem aware, then you're going to have a really hard time selling anything, right?
Yes.
Because I'm not aware that I've got a problem, so why would I buy anything?
Yeah.
If I am problem aware, but I'm not solution, I don't even know there is a solution, then I'm not looking for it. So I'm not out on, Google talks about this being the messy middle piece now, where people go out and start looking around all over to do their market research.
Yeah.
If they're not in that space, it's very hard to get in front of people and make a presentation.
Yeah.
But if they're problem aware, they're aware of the problem, they're aware, they're product aware, they're aware there is a solution out there, they just don't know who, they're not aware of you.
Absolutely.
Then that's a much shorter gap to close if you want to grow a business, right? It's much easier to close that gap than go back down the line and try and explain to people why they have a problem.
And that's a really good point, Paul, because I think a lot of marketeers and certainly a lot of agencies don't really get that, and they tend to focus on finding a solution out there to a customer that's looking for something today. And when that doesn't exist, when there is no market yet, because you're creating literally a whole new market that requires a completely different strategy. So I'm still a big fan of traditional marketing.
Yeah.
So, and if you're bringing a new product to market, so there's no demand for it, there's no understanding around it, then we've got a PR team, old-fashioned PR team, you might say. They'd kill me just I said that, but yeah.
We can't call them old-fashioned. They have to be like classic. Or so we have to come up with like a much better name.
But a really great PR stunt still can create a massive impact and can create interest and demand where none existed before. And methods like direct mail, like interruptive email marketing. So I think essentially it's whether you're looking at search-based marketing or interruptive marketing.
Yeah.
So search-based is when there is an existing demand for that product.
Yeah, so they're problem aware, aren't they, right? So they're aware of problem because they're searching for a solution. Well, I'd say, okay, so something really interesting. So obviously, I've had the privilege of spending time with you because you've come and you've been one of the mentors in the CEO boardroom that I run. What's really interesting is that the last CEO boardroom meeting we had, you weren't able to make it, so we brought in a gentleman by the name of Simon Leslie, who runs a £100 million plus business, and he was just absolutely going on about the fact that you've got to pay attention to more traditional forms of marketing,
100%.
and that actually the cost of acquisition on digital platforms is getting more and more expensive, right? So actually everybody's trying to compete in that red ocean, and actually saying, listen, print. Yeah, and his point of view was like, and obviously he's in the print world as well, but he was like saying, look, print is undervalued at the minute as a marketing channel, massively undervalued. Yeah, there's a lot less noise, and you can get half pages, full pages, for a lot less. And it's just interesting that you're identifying that as an opportunity as well right now.
Well, it's always been there. I mean, I built a print-based media company,
right,
and which I then sold to Richard Harpin 18 months ago. So that was events, it was online, it was e-newsletters, but the core of it was a print-based magazine, and everybody wanted to be in that magazine. Everybody wanted it on their desktop and in the reception. And it's really interesting when we interviewed people for Business Leader magazine, as much as they wanted to be online, they all wanted to be in the magazine, and they wanted a copy to give their mum and dad or to give their kids or to leave around their office. So the value of print, I think, is greater than the value of digital, because digital comes and goes.
Yep.
Once you've scrolled, it's gone. Whereas something that's print, so whether that's a magazine or whether it is a leaflet drop or direct mail.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Richard Harpin built a company called Check a Trade.
Yes.
Well, he acquired a company called Check a Trade. He is a massive believer in leaflet drops. So he promotes Check a Trade through leaflet drops.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to, I want to unpack this in a second, because obviously you're the first person we've ever had on the podcast who's sold a business to a billionaire. So that's a first, right? So we've had people on the podcast now who've done gone on Dragon's Den and got investment, but selling a business to a billionaire, which I do want to unpack with you. But I do think it's interesting. So when you set Business Leader up, just go back to that. Firstly, why did you call it Business Leader? What was the thought process behind that?
Yeah, that took ages and ages. So, well, first of all, to understand where it came from in the first place, because I was building a business and I wanted to get some media coverage as an entrepreneur, and I couldn't find anything. And then I looked at the States, and they had Forbes magazine, Entrepreneur magazine, Success, Fortune, that all these magazines that were aspirational for entrepreneurs, and there wasn't anything in the UK. So I looked, I couldn't find anything that was of a similar ilk. So I wanted to create that. And my first thought is along the lines of those American type products, Success magazine, Fortune.
Yep.
And actually, I spoke to a number of business leaders, and they said, actually, I'm not sure. It's very American, very, very American. I'm not quite sure that's British. So we literally sat with a piece of paper, and it must have taken us 3 months, my team and I, to come up with the idea for Business Leader, because it wasn't. We needed to make sure nobody else was using it. We needed to make sure it was clearly defined who our target audience was, and also that we could get the domains and the Twitter handles and everything else. So it took us about 3 months to come up with a name. We'd actually built the product before we'd named it. Yeah, and then once we launched it, it was actually regional at the start. So it's worth. I mean, we're talking about product fit.
Yeah,
and when I actually launched Business Leader originally, it was North Somerset. It was our region. So I'd launched it as a local magazine. And we very quickly realized we weren't going to get much traction at that level. So we then increased it to regional. So we made it Southwest Business Leader. And it wasn't until I took it fully national that we created that hockey stick effect. So again, we iterated the model quite a lot. So, it's very much local, then regional, then national. And each of those steps actually required a big leap of faith and investment as well, because we had to build the circulation, we had to build a print run, and printing and mailing out a magazine is very expensive.
Yeah.
So, so we started off small and we tested the market, I guess, locally. We, what type of entrepreneurs wanted to be in it, who did we want to feature in it. And then once we had got that model right, then we took it regional, and then we very quickly took it national.
And when you talk about saying one of your kind of goals and your ambitions at the moment is to help entrepreneurs to think bigger.
Yeah.
At that point, how big were you thinking?
Well, at that point, I was thinking international.
Really?
At one point, I sat down and said, I want to take on Forbes. I want to take on Fortune magazine. We want to take Business Leader to the States.
Okay. I could see that. I mean, that makes sense, right?
Yeah. And that was the plan.
Right.
And I think if Richard hadn't come along when he did, that was probably the next natural progression for us. I mean, we were building out big events as well. So we were building the magazine. We built out the events. I mean, there was actually one game-changing scenario, which was COVID.
Yeah.
Because we were running big events. We were running the Scale Up Awards with, nearly 1,000 people attending it, and Business Leader Awards. And we'd launched a tech version called GoTech and GoTech Awards. And so this was scaling, and the magazine was growing exponentially. The subscription was growing exponentially. And then COVID struck. And the one thing nobody does in the middle of a pandemic is want to advertise in your magazine, and certainly nobody's going to turn up to your events. And
weren't you about to run, like literally about to run an award when lockdown happened?
So I created the Scale Up Awards in 2018, and I partnered with Amazon on that. They were the major headline sponsor for it, and lots of other companies, HSBC, BMW, BMW Mini. Like, we had big sponsors lined up. We had the venue booked, and we had around 900 guests planned for it. So we launched it in 2018. It was 2 years in planning and making, and the event date was the 20th of March 2020, which was the weekend of lockdown.
So how close were you to to the event when it all shut down? How close?
So the event was due to take place on the Friday, and I pulled the event the previous Friday, 1 week before. But there was a consequence of that because nobody had experienced a pandemic before. So in terms of our suppliers and our partners, their immediate response, because everybody was panicking, their immediate response was, you're in breach of contract. If you pull out now, you don't do the event, you're in breach of contract. So the venue threatened to sue us for breach of contract. It was an absolute nightmare. So, and we had 900 people turning up. We had people flying in from all over the world. We had people flying in from the States. We had people from all across Europe. So I had to pull the event. I had no choice.
So how did you feel? Like that's a massive personal responsibility, isn't it?
Huge.
Like, not only have you got the responsibility, the financial responsibility, but you've also got responsibility for people's lives at that point about, whether they get ill, sick, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, how did you process that? How did you handle that? How did you go through? Because that was like, how did you go through that?
That was sheer adrenaline. I think the one thing I didn't do was panic, because everybody around me was panicking. Everybody, all our customers, suppliers. I also had a group of companies with 100 staff, and they needed to work from home as well really quickly, and we weren't geared up for work from home. So I was literally getting in the car and driving around buying 100 laptops to get our guys working from home. So I had all the operational issues with the rest of my group of companies and getting staff working from home. And I had this massive event literally hours away, and it was pretty horrendous, because the venue took a very aggressive stance and said they would sue if we didn't run the event. I said, well, we can't run the event because we're going into lockdown. And they said that's not technically the case, because lockdown commences at midnight. You're running your event at 6 p.m. And so it was pretty horrendous. You know what, though? In every situation like that, every crisis, there's a massive opportunity at the other side of. And for me, there was a golden opportunity that I didn't appreciate at the time. And that was, I had seen Business Leader as a UK publication and media. And what we had to do, advertisers cancelled immediately. Nobody wanted to be in a print magazine. Nobody was signing up to any events. Nobody was sponsoring any events. So our entire revenue stream, we lost £250,000 in 24 hours, and we lost our entire revenue stream.
Where was your revenue stream at that point?
That was about $2 million a year in that business.
Yeah.
And so that, relatively, that was the smallest part of our group, but it was also the most influential part of the group as well. But to lose that revenue overnight was, for any business, and not knowing when it would recover is a big thing. But where the opportunity for us was, we had never done podcasts, we'd never done webinars or anything of that nature, or video content. And because of lockdown, that was the only option. So we pivoted massively. We created a little room with a green screen, and we literally pivoted the business. And as consequence of that, we were picked up by several American entrepreneurs like Grant Cardone, like the Wolf of Wall Street.
Oh, right, yeah.
And they started
John Belford.
us. Yeah, Belford, yeah. And they started contacting us and saying, we'd love to be in your magazine or your media, your publication. So what happened then, Business Leader exploded, because there is only so much you can do with print. It's really powerful. It's more impactful than digital. But when you have digital, you've got a much wider reach.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened. So as a result of that, Business Leader ended up very much becoming the voice for business. And not just in the UK, but we had readers in Australia and in India, all the way across Europe and in the States. So the impact, the brand value of Business Leader exponentially increased within about 6 months. And then after about a year, when events started coming back again and people started going to the events, we kept that going, and that became a huge part of the business. And that combination then of having the digital stuff and the podcasts and the webinars alongside the magazine, alongside all the events, really took our brand global. and the impact of it and the credibility of it just grew hugely.
So maybe that was the version of global that you'd aspired to?
Absolutely. So it wasn't how I'd imagined it.
Yeah.
I'd very much imagined going into the States with a print magazine that would rival Forbes and Fortune. But actually how it transpired was incredible. So we ended up with a huge following in the US.
Sometimes I think it's really interesting because I think we get attached to the way something is supposed to happen rather than let go of the how piece and just focus on the vision.
Yeah.
And the universe, in my experience, usually has a much better plan for us. We just don't understand it at the point. And I think when you're trying to control everything, you miss out on that flow, that flow that can take you to the goal you want faster.
Yeah.
But you have to let go of your plan all the time. Look, do I think you should have a strategy? Definitely. But sometimes I think you also have to be able to let go of the strategy and go, actually, look, I've just got to trust that I'll get to this point, but it might be a detour a different way than the way I planned, right?
Absolutely. That's uncomfortable, and people don't like discomfort, and it requires risk and it requires a leap of faith. So, if you've got a business and it's working to a degree and you want to really scale it up, but you're growing at 5% a year, 10% a year, but to be able to really scale it up means you've got to pivot and do this over here, and you're risking your core business, and people don't want to do that. So it takes a big leap of faith. So
what's your definition? Well, okay, so let's explore that for a second, because I think it's an interesting point. I think there's that whole phrase that says that good is the enemy of great, or like that whole kind of like if you just are happy to be good at what you do rather than exceptional, I think there's always that risk. And I think there's always I can't remember, I think it was Joe Polish, he said something years ago that struck me. He said you have to be prepared to break your own business model.
100%.
You have to be prepared to go, this is great to this point, but it's not going to go to the next level in its current format. I think that's the thing that takes the courage to do it. How many times have you, like, what's your definition of scale up, first of all? Because there's a lot kicking around. What's yours?
I guess I'd probably follow the Scale Up Institute model.
Okay.
Which is 20% year-on-year growth for 3 or more years. I mean, that's the technical definition of it. But I think scale up can be whatever you want it to be. I think the real difference for businesses is whether they're building a lifestyle business or whether they're building a business that they want to grow and eventually exit. Not that they necessarily will exit, but they run it as if they're going to. So, and I think if you're running a lifestyle business, you don't really want to scale up, because scaling up a lifestyle business requires moving away from being a lifestyle business to actually, having to put in some really serious investment, risk, blood, sweat and tears. And, I think if you want to run a lifestyle business, that's absolutely fine. But if you want to build a serious business, you've really got to look at scale up. And the businesses that do that.
So what do you think people resist when you say, because I agree with you, I think that, and I've always said there's an identity shift that has to take place, that you're prepared to shift your identity from saying, I'm running a lifestyle business, although you may not use those language or that words, but you're running a business that you're pretty much in control of, and it's great. But actually, if you want to build, the term I regularly refer to as kind of grown up business, or you want to build something that's got value, shareholder value, there is a fundamental shift in identity that has to take place, right? I talk about becoming a scale up CEO, because I think that's the identity. You have to see yourself as the person growing that business, not running that business, right? Like, what do you think of in your experience? Because you've scaled, how many businesses have you scaled now?
Well, I've acquired or built 15 companies, but they're not all necessarily scale up, so probably 5.
Okay. So when you look at, let's just take one of your businesses at the moment that you look at and go, right, okay, I've got a plan to scale this. What are the first 5 things you're looking at in terms of where you're going to start investing? Where do you put your money if that's your plan? Walk me through some of that.
Okay. I think the first thing, and I'm going through this actually with one of our businesses at the minute, is that it's got to be able to run without me.
Right.
And if it's going to run without me, what does the management team have to look like? I mean, actually, the first thing is there the market scale?
Yeah.
So, that's absolutely the first thing, because if you've got 95% of the market, that might be, if you're a shop, for example, and it might be a 3-mile radius. If you're a digital business, it's just the demand for your product. If you've got 95% of the market, you're not going to grow your business. So the first thing is there the market? The second thing is, what resources do I need to be able to scale up? And then the third thing is, have I got the mindset to do it? Have I got the drive, the ambition, and the passion? And am I prepared to take the risk? And am I prepared to put in the time, effort, and money to be able to do it? And that's a bit most business leaders and entrepreneurs fail on.
Fail or just don't want to pay the price?
Probably not pay the price, because to build a business like that, to build a scale-up business, you have to take risk and there's sacrifice.
Yeah.
Being an entrepreneur is a very hard thing. It's not suited to everybody. And I think we're in a society now where, particularly with platforms like Instagram, everybody can aspire and everybody thinks this is amazing. I want to build my own company and I want to scale my own business. What's actually required to run a business and scale a business is very different. And the mindset required to it, you need a lot of resilience, you need grit, you need focus, you need passion, and you need to be able to show up even when you don't want to.
Yeah.
And actually, it's a very lonely place as well, because when you grow a business, you build a team of people, but it's not their business, it's your business. And there's times you can't share what's going on. You just can't share what's going on with your team, because I remember one scenario where I couldn't pay the VAT at the end of the month. We didn't have enough money to pay our VAT that was due. And if I turned around to my team and said, I can't pay you all this month because we got a VAT bill, they're going to panic, they're going to disappear. So you just can't do that. So
it's lonely, isn't it? Sometimes
it's very, very lonely, and I think that's why peer-to-peer connection is so important. And actually,
community. It is a community app,
and that's why I love what you're doing, Paul, with your coaching and how you've been able to connect those peers from different industries, different sectors, even different sizes of businesses, and how you bring them together. And I think that's exactly what entrepreneurs need. I feel that entrepreneurs don't know enough about the impact of something like that.
Yeah, I have a real worry at the moment about what I think Instagram is doing to the perception of entrepreneurship. It genuinely worries me because I think it is selling the dream without selling the reality of what it really takes. Yeah. And it's interesting because I've had 2 conversations with 2 clients recently who had, in the last 6 or 9 months, had members of their team go start their own business because they were like, oh, this looks like it's easy, you're making a ton of money, whatever, without realizing the 15 or 18 years of blood, sweat and effort that got them to that point. They're just looking at the end result and they're going, oh great, I'd like that lifestyle. And then suddenly they go on their own and they find out how tough it is, how brutal a startup can be. Because I think startups are like startup versus scale up is some people love the startup thing, some people love the scale up thing. And I think it's a very, like, some entrepreneurs love that getting off the ground phase.
Yeah, absolutely.
And other people love the whole kind of people management process that requires to scale something.
Yeah,
like which
very,
bit,
totally different.
Yeah, I was going to say, where do you sit of the two? Which bit do you like most?
If I'm honest, I would say I really enjoy this startup.
Right.
So because I'm an ideas person, I like to create, and I'm fairly good at building teams. So I think for me, I enjoy that startup, creating the idea, creating the model, testing it, launching it, and then putting a team around me that can take it and go forward with it. So I've got to the stage now where we almost operate like an ecosystem where I've got what we call corporate services that sits right in the middle, which is HR, it's finance, IT, and that is a hub. So whenever we launch a new venture, a new business, we plug that straight into it.
Yeah.
And then for the new product launch or business launch, really all we need is sales and operations. We've got all the other elements in place and ready to go.
So I'm really interested you mentioned sales, because I want to go back to your kind of like how you approach scale up. Okay. So firstly, you're talking about is there market demand? That's a critical thing that I don't think, and it's crazy to me that most entrepreneurs now don't even do the market research to find out how big's the market opportunity before I spend 3 years of my life trying to capitalize on this. And I think now with various platforms and the data and everything out there with AI, you really have no excuse for not doing that analysis, right? That's easier than it's ever been to find out if there is a real demand for that. Point number 2 is, okay, great. You've then got to go, do I mentally want to do this? Am I prepared? And I use the analogy a lot now. I think entrepreneurs, you've got to train, and you and I can talk about this, we're both quite into the biohacking space stuff, because I think as an entrepreneur, you've got to commit to the training of, I'm going to train for this like it's a marathon. I'm going to train for it like I'm going to be in it for the next 10 or 15 years of my life. I'm going to commit to excellence, that whole kind of commitment to that.
Yeah.
But part of that commitment is the resilience of doing it when no one's looking, right? Absolutely. Instagram is all the stuff that everyone shows off when everyone's looking, but actually, my experience, great businesses are built in the dark, in the winters when no one's around, no one's cheering you on. It's you, your laptop, and your dream, your desire, your goal. That's the tough bit. So we talk about the mindset piece. We'll come back to identity, and I want to talk about imposter syndrome with you. But how important then in the scale up piece is building or having a real understanding of sales?
I mean, it's really interesting when I work with a business who aren't achieving the growth rate that they want,
right,
or aren't quite getting to where they want to be. Which we just look at three elements, which is lead generation, sales conversion, and customer retention. That's just the three elements that I always look at. And if a business isn't growing, it's because of one of those three isn't working properly. And I think one of the challenges with particularly smaller businesses is that if you're focusing on sales, you're not doing the work. If you're focusing on doing the work and running your business, you're not driving sales. And they're two different things. And you know, right at the very start, that might be the same person, but you've got to get to the point very quickly where you've got to have a person, a resource that is bringing in the sales for you to run the business, or you're bringing in the sales and somebody else is running the business. And if I look at any business, doesn't matter what sector it is, it's that combination. And, you know, to get a business to where to scale a business to where you want to get it, you have to have a sales resource.
Yes.
And the problem is that's very often the entrepreneur at the start. And actually even 20 years later can still be.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And until they take that step, they end up in this vicious cycle. And I actually call it the marketing wave, which is you focus on sales and then you get to the point where you get really busy. So you take your foot off sales to do the work, and then you slide down again, and then you get to a critical point, which is painful, and you focus on sales again. And the reality is what you need to do is have an absolute focus on sales and a focus on sales conversion and customer retention. So those three, whenever I look at any business, I just put those three things on the table. Look at their lead generation, look at their sales conversion, and look at their customer retention.
So a quick story, but also two insights here recently. One is, I was recently talking to a sort of a managing director of a £9 million business, right? And he was still doing all the sales.
Right.
And I'm like, you're not running the business if you're doing that, first of all.
Yeah.
Number two, I think there's a massive skill gap for most entrepreneurs, which is they know how to make the sales, but they don't know how to run a sales team.
Yes.
And I think there's a really, really key decision that you've got to make in the scale-up journey now, which is, do I want to learn that skill set, or do I want to hire a fractional sales director now? Because that's something that, I mean, in my career, that didn't exist 5 years ago.
Yeah,
and there's now a lot of, we've got a couple of partners that we're working with who actually, one guy runs a £4 million business, and his entire business is to go in and build sales teams for companies who want to scale, but they don't have the skill set. Yeah. And I think it's that internal ability to build a sales team is actually a skill set that's not talked about very often.
Yeah, and actually it's absolutely critical.
Yeah.
And, okay, if you're building an e-commerce business, maybe not so, that's far more about marketing. But if you're building a business that requires some sort of human interaction, so whether that is in a call center sales environment, or whether that is out on the road and meeting people. And I don't think in this country we put enough value on sales and the sales profession. I think it is almost
I don't think we see it as a profession at all.
Yeah. It's almost seen as almost a dirty word.
It's like you failed at everything else, right? Yeah. I mean, like for me, I started my career in selling. Like you and me come from a sales background first, right? Like I'm a salesperson first and foremost. That's where I started my career.
Yeah.
And I've always been, like in America, it's a profession. Whereas in the UK, it's like, oh, you're a salesperson. It's like you failed at everything else. Yeah. That's the only thing you could do.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's actually the most valuable thing you can do to me. It's like, absolutely, if you can sell your way out of anything, there isn't a problem that you're facing most in businesses that more sales won't fix.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so if you've got a cash flow problem, sales will fix it if you go and make the right sales. If you've got an issue that you're trying to solve, more sales usually gives you more capital and more opportunities to do it.
Yeah.
If you want to go and get sponsors for an event, that's still a sales function.
Absolutely.
And I think certainly there is a perception that sales is somehow a dirty thing, which is for me, it's I've never understood that mindset.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, it's the highest value. It's serving. Selling is serving, right? We have a phrase. Yeah. We have a phrase we use in my team, which is serve hard, sell easy, right? Which is, if you over deliver value to people, people will say, well, what's next, right? This is great. I love this. What's next? And I think that to me, so many companies are still running around with the perception that selling is pushing something onto somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that phrase, selling is serving. I think if you get good at sales, you will never be hungry.
True.
Right? Because you'll always be able to create an opportunity for yourself. And it's really interesting. You mentioned the US. So I was there a few weeks ago, and I had just the most joyous experience everywhere I went. When I went into a retail store, when I went into a shop, where the staff there were delighted, or appeared to be delighted to see me, and couldn't do enough to help.
Yeah.
And they were present, and they were engaged, and they came straight up. What can I help you with, sir? And then when I came back to the UK, I remember walking into a shop, and there was somebody behind the counter on their phone, didn't even look up.
Yep.
And I just thought, even in a shop, it's just, you got to sell, and even in a restaurant, you got to sell. You want to sell the desserts, you want to sell the coffee. So, everybody should be in sales. And actually, in my business, when we do our induction, one of the parts of that we say is everybody's in sales. In our business, everybody's in sales.
100%.
You're either selling the product and service that we do, or you're selling our business. When you go home and you talk to your family, when you talk to your friends, you're either selling our business or you're selling our product and service.
But so to go back to the three things you were talking about, I think what's really interesting is, I think most companies, if they're looking to scale, they'll spend more money on marketing, because that's the perception is that's easier, whereas actually it's the high risk.
Yeah.
They view sales as this thing that sort of happens, but they don't really understand why. If you ask most businesses, what's your current conversion rate? 9 times out of 10, they'll look at you like, well, we don't really know.
100%.
And I'm like, well, okay, hang on a second. The fastest point of leverage for most businesses is to get better at selling, or to have a selling system.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll give you a good example. A client of mine recently working with, spending, significant amount on AdWords every month. We're getting 500 leads a month, which is great, but we're converting 150. And his question to me was, should I double the spend on AdWords? And I'm like, why would you do that? Wrong question, first of all. Secondly, what if we just worked on the process internally? Because if we took it from 150 conversions to 250, right? That's all pure profit, because, or essentially revenue to the bottom line, because we haven't got any extra cost.
Yeah.
And yet he was like, well, I'll just spend more on ads. And I'm like, no, but why would you do that? It's like, yes, you can scale, but it's actually more risky. It's actually better to do that. So when you look at a business, or you look at your own business, like how do you look at the sales process? Like how do you approach that?
I mean, I'm fanatical about this type of stuff. So we analyze everything, we metric everything.
Okay.
And it's interesting, we look at average order value constantly. We look at sales conversion constantly. We look at when we have a customer on board, the next question is, how do we increase the revenue of our existing customers? So is there an opportunity to increase order values with them? Is there an opportunity to increase the recurring time spent on a purchase? Can we get them to buy more often? So we look at all of this data constantly, and we analyze it, and we study it, and we look at how we can improve it. I'm a big fan of marginal gains. So if you've got a website that's converting 2%, which would be very poor, and you increase it by 1% to 3%, you've got an increase of 50% in your conversion. So, if you look at marginal gains across your business, and also for us, training as well. So we listen into every sales call, and we analyze everything that we're doing, and it makes a huge difference. If you can just increase your order value by 5%, increase the speed of purchase, and all those little bits, if you can just improve them by 2 or 3 or 4%, you end up with an incredible business that just grows and grows and grows.
Yeah. Well, one of the presentations that I give at a summit is how to increase your profits by 101%. And it's like, look, there's 5 ways and there's 5 things you can focus on, and most people are just only focused on 1 or 2.
Absolutely.
And I think it's what's interesting to me is, number one, most people aren't collecting the data.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. It's like, for me, I think like you've got to look at data and dashboards. Yeah. Most people are not measuring anywhere near enough to be able to move it. And point number 1. Point number 2 for me is this whole thing of like, you've got to get into the sales mindset of like, okay, great, but view it from a service perspective. It's like, okay, great. If a customer comes in, what are the other problems you can help them with? The worst thing a customer can ever say to you is when you go and offer them a product, and we've all had this happen, is you offer them something and they say, oh, I just bought that from your competitor. And you said, well, why did you buy it from them? And they say, well, I didn't know you did that. Yeah. And I think there's this almost reluctance to educate people about the other things that you do. Yep. Because you're like, I don't want to come off as pushy. And I'm like, yeah, but if you're solving a genuine problem for somebody, that's not pushy. That's solving a problem. Yeah. You know,
it is serving.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we've all had the experience that we go to a DIY store or something, and God, this is going back nearly 15 years. I remember working with a client who owned a chain of retail DIY stores, and it was small stuff, but there were 15 of them. Yeah. And we just put checklists in. And so then when someone came to the till, we just said, oh, look, I noticed you're buying that. Yeah. By the way, just before you leave, do you need this? Do you need this? Yeah. Do you need this? Do you need this? And 9 times out of 10, people would go, oh, God, yeah, I don't have any of that. So I need 2 of those, not the other one. I've got that. But then they didn't go home, and we've all had that experience where you go home, you go to put a shelf up, and you haven't got the right screws, or you haven't got the right, and you're like, oh, why didn't? And now I've got to drive back, and it's like, that's a pain.
Yes. The classic is, do you want batteries with that? Right? That's it. Whatever you're buying, ask where is the upsell opportunity. If you're buying a camera, you're going to need batteries, or
or a proper carry case, exactly. Or are you traveling abroad, or it's exactly. But that's the conversation, isn't it? And I think for me, the UK, one of the best opportunities you have is to just be a really friendly, nice place to do business with, because most people are not actually, which is really,
100%.
It's scary, right? Like your differentiator could just be being really nice to people.
Do you know what? I think a lot of success can be determined by how easy or difficult it is to do business with you.
Yes.
You put more barriers in the way, then you're not going to sell as much.
True.
And that's, if you can just actually look at that, which is the customer experience as well. So from the point of getting an inquiry all the way through to the sales process, the onboarding process, the invoicing process, the whole transaction. And in the UK, we generally work in a linear way, which is we have the customer at the start, we get the order in, and then there's all these other elements: fulfillment, production, distribution, whatever it might be. And then there's a customer at the end, which is the take delivery. And I think if you change that mindset and you put the customer in the middle and everything circles around that, you get a completely different experience and a completely different outcome. And this is a real challenge, I think, for British companies, which is they might be good customer facing at the start and at the end when a delivery driver turns up. But even then, sometimes the delivery driver can be awful. You can have a terrible experience with a delivery driver. So if you take a sales approach to the whole experience and put the customer in the middle rather than at the beginning of the end, it changes the outcome dramatically.
Yeah, we had the amazing Jeff Ram speak at Scale Up Summit last year, and he has this whole philosophy, and seriously, if you haven't checked it out, really do. It's brilliant. He has a whole thing around celebrity service, and he talks about how the fact if a celebrity turned up in your business tomorrow, you would treat them very differently. Absolutely. And his point is, well, if George Clooney turned up in your business and you're going to treat him differently tomorrow, why wouldn't you treat your existing customers? Why wouldn't you treat people differently now, like they're celebrities? And I've always thought that's just, it was a very impactful presentation. People still talk about it today. But I think it's that fundamental shift in mindset, isn't it? The number of times people said to me, business would be great if it wasn't for the team and the customers. And you're like, whoa, hang on a second. If your mindset, like all the money you currently want in the business or to make in your life is currently in the hands of somebody else.
Absolutely.
They're called customers and they're not going to give it to you unless you add value to them or change or solve a problem for them. So actually, you need to be, I've always believed you should fall in love with your customer, not fall in love with your product. Because if you fall in love with your product, that's going to get, tech's going to wipe it out, or AI is going to, whatever. Yeah. So, innovation's going to potentially disrupt you to the point that business isn't relevant. Yeah. Whereas if you fall in love with your customer, it's like, well, what do they need right now? Yeah. Our customers need very different things. I mean, I've been coaching now for over 20 years. When I started, the things that people needed back then is very different to what they need now. And the tools available now are different to back then.
Absolutely.
If you are passionate about serving your market, the who you're serving, the how you deliver that's going to change.
Yeah.
But the who you serve, 100%. You've got to be dialed into.
Yeah. No, that customer experience element, I think what happens over a period of time, because you're doing it day in, day out, you're forgetting the point that customer has never potentially dealt with you before. So their experience of you is completely different to, you've been doing this for 20 years. And over a period of time, I think some entrepreneurs, not that they take their customers for granted, but they get so focused in building the company and doing what they're doing and their products and their supply chains and their cash flow management and all this, they actually forget to concentrate on the customer, and they kind of take the customer for granted. And if you have the mindset that you're there to delight the customer and make it a joyful experience, and you really actually mean that, and you teach your team to mean that as well, it's a game changer. I think it's really interesting because I think a lot of businesses are not aligned. Their teams aren't aligned on this. So front end of the business, we want to look after the customer, but it's back to this linear. In production, I don't care about the customer. My job's just to make the product. Distribution, I don't care about the customer. My job is just to package it and shift it out. And at the delivery end, I don't care about the customer. My job is just to drop it off at the house. And I think that we really fail to address that all the way through.
Like when you're trying to, if that's your passion, how do you unify that approach? How do you do that?
We're not. I would say the businesses that I'm in are all service-led businesses, right, and almost everybody's kind of customer-facing in some way. So from that point of view, for us, what we share is customer data. This is customer retention rates, and we do customer feedback every month. So we want to know how happy our customers are, and then we share that with everybody.
So are you tracking Net Promoter Score?
Net Promoter Score,
yeah. Okay.
And I think it's really important to do that. But for other companies that I've worked with a number of manufacturers, and there is a huge disconnect there. So one of the things that I like to do with some of those businesses, say manufacturing businesses, is reward production staff based on customer satisfaction. And generally speaking, in a production environment, you reward your staff based on production output.
Yeah, output, productivity. Yeah.
And very few businesses actually reward those staff with customer satisfaction. And, I walked around the factory and I seen somebody making a product and they'd missed elements off and they didn't care. They just stuck it in the package and said, it's not my problem. My job's just to get it out. So, so there's no, and actually in a lot of production lines, it's like that because they're only taking care of one element of it. That's my bit. Then it goes to somebody else. They add that bit, goes to somebody else. And in that sense, there's nobody taking overall ownership of it.
Yeah.
So one of the keys is to get everybody to own it, even if it's not their little section of it. And you can do that, and businesses should do that. So I think you should reward a lot of companies now are looking at profit share with their staff. So that's one way of doing it, but it's still quite disconnected from the reality, which is what does the customer think?
Well, profit share is an internal metric almost. Yeah. It's not a customer satisfaction metric at all, is it? It's not linked to that in any way.
No. And it should be. It absolutely should be.
I think, so, I mean, obviously you've talked about the commitment it takes to want to go on a scale-up journey.
Yeah.
And, it's to talk to us, like, when was the lowest point on your journey of scaling? When was the thing when you sat there and thought, I honestly don't know if I can do this?
That's happened a few times. So it happened during COVID because, our media company fell over almost overnight. It also had an effect on our other businesses because as a marketing group in that sort of environment, customers what they're doing is not spending. They're holding back spend. So that was a very tough time, but it was for everybody. And then 20 years ago, when I had built a very successful career, we built a company from 1 million to 12 million in 3 years. So that's probably 20 million in today's money.
That's rapid growth.
Yeah, that was some huge growth from 1 to 12 million. from 80,000 a month to 1 million a month in 36 months, making about 20% net profit.
That's fast.
Yeah. So it was very fast growing. It was also very profitable, and it was also had an incredible brand and reputation as well. And as a result of that, the business was bought by an American US Fortune 500 company called Masco. And
did you plan to sell it? Was that when you started that? Was that like you've had what? How many exits? Like 3, 5. Were those all intentional exits, or were they just were there some that were opportunity exits?
So one of the things that I do in every business is build it with the ability to exit and sell it. Right. What does this business need to look like to be attractive to a buyer?
Right.
I don't necessarily want to sell it or will sell it. So my marketing company is 21 years old. I don't want to sell that business because that's my passion project, and I love it, and I love going into that business. So, but in other businesses, that I have sold, I think having that, that intention of selling, I think is absolutely crucial. So when I work with any other business, that's the starting point, is how does this business look in 3 years for us to be able to sell it? And we start working on it now. And that brand element of it is really important.
Yeah, I want to come back to that, because you talked about that at the CEO boardroom, and I think there's a really important lesson in there about getting exit ready. Yeah. But so you'd had this business, it was a million, it was up to 3.
Yeah.
You're selling to a fairly big US company.
Yeah, 14 billion.
Yeah, that's fairly big. Yeah, fair enough. So what happened there? How did that fall over?
So we built that was successful. So we built that business from 1 million to 12 million in 3 years. It was acquired by US Fortune 500 company. I'm now exiting the business, and I am in my mid-30s, and I think I'm really clever, and I think I'm really smart, and I'm thinking now I've done this several times, that I've got the Midas touch. And I then acquired another business that was struggling severely. It was in dire straits, but I felt I could walk into it and turn it around. And I acquired the business, and I had missed elements of the due diligence. And as a result of that, I ended up in a legal debate over dilapidations on a building, which escalated out of control from legal cost point of view. And I'm dealing with that, and also trying to turn around a business that's losing a lot of money. And I got to the point where I couldn't do it anymore. I had put in all the money that I had to turn that business around and scale it and exit, and actually it fell over, so I couldn't turn it around. And what I hadn't realized is that of all the paperwork I signed when I was buying the business, there was some cross guarantees and there was some personal guarantees in there that, again, now I would have spotted it straight away, and I would have dealt with it straight away. Back then, I just thought, it doesn't matter, I'll go and buy this business, we'll build it, we'll exit it, we'll do it all over again. And that didn't happen. So I lost that business very quickly after acquiring it. And I lost all my money with it.
How long?
About 18 months.
So it took 18 months to pretty much wipe out what you'd built in the previous 3 years.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
It can happen that fast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I literally lost everything. So not only the business, but, I had to sell my house. I mean, it was pretty dire. And I ended up with about over £100,000 worth of credit card debt as well. So it was pretty horrendous. And it happened within a few months. There was just a domino effect, which I couldn't control. When you're in that cycle, the other thing that happens is you can't think clearly, because your stress levels are through the roof. You're dealing with all these problems in the business. You're dealing with these on a personal level. And I think when you're in a high stress environment like that, especially when you are seeing everything that you've built disappear in front of you, I think it's very hard to make very good and clear decisions. So one of the things I've learned from that now is to be able to take myself away and take myself out of that environment and put myself in a different environment. When I want to make big decisions, I will always go away. I'll jump in a plane and I'll turn up somewhere and sit down and think about everything, put it all down on paper, weigh everything up, and then make very clear decisions.
Was there a moment in that where you thought, I'm done, I want out of this, this is like too much?
Yeah. There was 100%, and that what really blew that business up was really to a degree was me not doing my homework, due diligence. So there was probably a serving of arrogance in that, because
ego.
I could ego,
right?
And also I felt I didn't deserve it as well. So I had a real sense of imposter syndrome at that point, which is, who am I to have all of this? Who am I to have these cars? Who am I to have, no education, no background, came from a council house? Why should I be having all of this? So I think part of it, I realized after we exited for a big deal that, did I deserve all of this? It's not for the likes of me. So I think part of it was also self-sabotage as well. So
it's a hard thing to admit to yourself, isn't it?
Yeah, and I had to tackle that, because if I didn't, I was never going to make anything of myself if I built something again and self-sabotaged again. So I had to really go deep personally, and I think actually, Paul, the main driver there actually were my kids, because I had an 11-year-old and a 6-year-old who now had family home was going, and I wanted to look after the kids. I wanted to make sure they had a better life than I ever had. So my motivation at that point was to say, I've got to turn this around. I've got to do something. I've got to rebuild. And I drove down. I live in Weston-super-Mare, and I literally drove down to the beach and parked on the beach, looking out at the sea and thinking, what on earth am I going to do now? I've got no money now to go and build another company. So, but I looked really at the skills that I had. So I said, okay, I don't have the money, but I've got knowledge and I've got skills, and I know I'm very good at growing businesses. And I sat there literally in that car, and I worked out a formula to help businesses grow, and I packaged that up, and then I launched a new business pretty much within a few days.
That's a really inspiring story. I think, I think everybody, I always say there's two questions that entrepreneurs face, and they face them at different times. One is it worth it? And the second one is, can I do it? Yeah. And I think if you can answer, it's worth it, not sure I can do it, you're still going to stay in the game. I think if you go, it's not worth it and I don't think I can do it, that's usually when you tend to quit. Did you get any help to deal with the self-sabotage side of it? Did you seek anyone out? Or was it just a process you took yourself through?
Yeah, it was, but 20 years, when I was a young man, when I was in my early 20s, when I came to England, when I was 18, I immersed myself in learning. So I immersed myself in personal development. So Tony Robbins, all Napoleon,
Brian Tracy, Zig Ziglar, Napoleon Hill, all the good stuff, all the greats.
So I filled my brain with all this type of stuff, and actually that's what I went back to. So when I lost that business and I sat there on that beach, I figured out, I knew I couldn't work for anybody else. That I would be an impossible employee, and I couldn't do that anyway because I'm a creator, I'm a builder. And so I knew I had to launch something. I knew I had to create a business, but I didn't have the money, didn't have the resources to do it. And I didn't want to build something again and for it to fall over again. So I had to go deep into myself. And that's what I did actually for about a year, which is I re-immersed myself in Tony Robbins and 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. All of those books, all of that knowledge I went back to, and I literally started all over again, read all of them over and over again. And in that first year, it was really tough because my income, I'd gone from being fairly wealthy to having an income of 16,000 in my first year. So I ended up, credit card debt everywhere. But I just immersed myself in learning. And as a result of that, I started to properly untangle some, I call them my demons, that, that were holding me back. And self-sabotage.
New level. There's a phrase I use which is new level, new devil, which is I think anytime you go to a new level in your life, It's the shadow self is what we're talking about, isn't it? So, the reality is the bigger the win, the bigger the shadow, right? The brighter the light, the bigger the shadow.
Yeah.
You get a lot of celebrities and you get a lot of people. I remember seeing Robbie Williams talk about this on an interview. He talked about, he'd walk out on stage in front of 80,000 people, and the shadow side of him was massive, and he had real problems with it.
Absolutely.
And I think those demons come out. The bigger it gets, the bigger the shadow itself. And if you haven't done the work on that stuff, that's usually the one that's dangerous, right?
That whole process, I ended up developing a formula, but and what I realized the most important thing is if you have absolute purpose and you're committed to that purpose, then you can deal with everything else. And I think previously my purpose had been to make a lot of money, and that in itself is a pretty worthless pursuit because, the saying goes, money doesn't bring happiness. It certainly can do. It can certainly enable
it. It can remove a lot of stress, and it can create a lot of stress, right?
But that's what I was chasing, was money. And I changed that, and I repositioned that, which is the purpose is to make a difference, to create something of real value, is to help people, serve people. And I really believe if you help enough other people with no agenda and you do that, then it definitely comes back. So when I sat there on that day on that beach, I knew that I knew the ingredients to grow and scale a business, and what I needed was absolute purpose. And so I launched a consultancy business and advising other companies how to grow and develop their businesses. And then I turned that.
Did you have? I mean, like, I'm just relating personally, right? So obviously, what was it 10, 11 years ago? I had a business that failed, and I think I really struggled for a period of time there with the whole identity piece and the imposter syndrome of like, I'm still talking to people about giving them advice on how to grow a business, even though I've just had one that failed.
Yeah.
And I definitely had imposter syndrome around that for at least the next year, big time. And was almost embarrassed to talk about it or share about it. Like, was that the same for you, or did you was it still an internal thing for you about how am I going to justify what I've been doing? Or
and it comes back to that purpose again. So when something like that happens, it massively knocks your confidence, and your sense of self-worth changes. And so to get back on that horse and to get back up again and to go again, it requires because not everybody does it, and sadly I've seen a number of people where they've lost a business and they never get back on that horse again.
Can I just say something I think I heard you say, which I think is really powerful? So you said, you almost dropped it in and you said, I'm a builder, you're a builder, right? And I thought that's really interesting because that's your identity.
Yeah.
You're not, I think quite often people go, oh, I'm the owner of this business and that's the identity.
Yeah.
The challenge being there is if your identity is linked inextricably with the business and the business fails, then you feel personally like you failed, as opposed to understanding, look, entrepreneurship, you're going to run multiple businesses if you're going to play the game. Some are going to work great. So you've got to almost have that investor mindset. Some are going to go great. Some are going to fail. Some are going to fail for nothing to do with you, like COVID market situations or stuff that's nothing to do with you. If your identity is really linked to that, that's a problem.
It is a huge problem. And actually, a lot of business owners, their identity absolutely becomes their business, and if that business fails, they don't know who they are anymore. And I know of at least two very successful entrepreneurs whose businesses failed and they ended their own life and they didn't want to carry on anymore. And I know many who have never recovered from that, and they're a shadow of their former self. So I think you're absolutely.
So how do you build resilience? Like how do you approach that mentally to build resilience? Because I think one of the entrepreneurial skills is resilience. There's a great book called Anti-Fragility, which talks about this concept of being anti-fragile, which is when you get hit, you actually get stronger.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I can't remember who recommended it to me, but it's a really interesting concept of like a material that when you hit it, it gets stronger. Whereas most of us, I think we take a hit and we get, most people get weaker. And I think it's like, okay, how did you build resilience? Because you've come back from a lot.
No, absolutely. I think, that purpose element to me is actually, to get back to the point we were just talking about, is I am not my business and my business is not me. My business is a product. And that product happens to be a software business or a marketing company or a media business. So I'm not my business, and that business is a product. I treat the business as a product. This is what it looks like. This is what works. So I distance myself from the business, and I think that's really, really important, because otherwise you never ever switch off.
Which is also important if you want to sell it, right?
Yes, 100%.
Like because I often ask entrepreneurs, and I say, "Who are you going to sell this to?"
Yeah,
and they look at me very oddly, like, "Well, I don't really know yet." And I'm like, "Well, why are you building it then? Like, if you don't know who the end customer is, if you don't know who you're going to sell it to, why build it?"
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. No, it's a real issue. I think for me as well is that a sense of showing up and wanting to be somebody and wanted to achieve something, because I wanted my kids to see me do that, because I wanted them to go on to do great things. So I think that sense of ownership, because I didn't want to let other people down, and B, I wanted my kids to see that, that they could go on and do this, and in life they will fail, they will fall over, and actually it's, that's the norm. It's really interesting. In the US, entrepreneurs are rock stars, and in the UK, we are looked upon. If there's a failure, it's a catastrophe in the UK, and it's really frowned upon.
Yeah.
Whereas in the US, they celebrate failure, because that's an iteration to success.
Yeah.
You come back and you learn from it.
I'm not going to name the bank, but a couple of years ago, I went to open a bank account for a new business that I was starting, and the bank manager took great pleasure in pointing out the fact that I'd had a business fail 9 years ago.
Yeah.
And I just looked at him and I said, "What were you doing 9 years ago?" And he looked at me very oddly, and I was like, what were you like, what relevance has that got to do to anything? It's like, I had a business fail 9 years ago. And like, what is, like, you're not, like, we don't think I've changed, I don't think I've grown. I thought it was a really interesting, kind of like, if that's your paradigm for assessing people's potential.
Yeah.
So what was come on, you've teased it now and it's driving me nuts. So what was the formula that you came up with in that darkest moment that actually became the gift? What was the formula?
So I looked at what my skill set was and what had enabled me to grow a lot of companies successfully. And I looked, there was three elements to it. One is purpose, when you're absolutely clear on where you're going and what the business looks like, and what it tastes like, and its personality. So absolute purpose. The second one is planning. I think to run a really successful business and grow, you need a lot of strategic planning. And then the third one was execution. So companies that succeed on a big scale are very good at execution.
Yep.
And there's a lot of people out there with great ideas, and the cemeteries are littered with people with great ideas that couldn't execute. So it's not about the idea, it's about an ability to execute on an idea. So
what stops most people executing in your experience? Why do you think people don't?
Procrastination.
Right. But where's procrastination come from? Why do people procrastinate?
Actually, probably purpose as well. Going back to, we chase white rabbits. We have all these ideas all the time, and which ones do we actually execute on? I think quite often what will happen is somebody will start to execute, and then they'll get bored, and they'll jump into something else, and they'll pick up an idea, start to run with it, and then big shiny thing over here, big shiny thing over there, and then they're off. So they never actually see anything through to the end. So and that is a key to success, is really good execution, where you're very clear on where the starting point is and where the end point is. So I took these three elements: purpose.
You have to change the third one for persistence, surely. Surely, right? Because execution is about the ability to keep going when it's hard, right?
Yeah.
Like it is. I think
it's also about technical competency as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Because you can work very hard doing the wrong thing.
True.
Yeah. So execution's an ability to. It's about momentum, and it's about technical competency as well. So you have to be able to execute well and efficiently, like a military operation, as well. Because otherwise, if you just imagine the military, if they soldiers on the ground running all over the place. They're absolutely clear. Military is probably a good example. They're very clear on what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
They're very good at planning and strategy, and then they're extremely good at execution. And they train and train and train on all three of those. And I think that's the way to grow a business.
Yeah.
So I took these three elements: purpose, plan, execute, and I created an acronym called Perplex. And that became my consultancy business that I launched, and that was 21 years ago.
Love that. You remind me of something. I had the privilege of interviewing CEO of a private equity firm, and I said to him, like, what were 2 or 3 of the things that you do when you invest in a business that make the biggest upside? And he said, number one, the first thing we do is take all the leadership team off site for a 2-day leadership retreat to get everyone aligned around the vision and the values. And he said, and number 2, we insist on quarterly planning sessions. He said we insist on it. They go in the diary for the next 2 to 3 years. And he said those 2 things alone have the biggest impact. In the fastest way possible, because those 2 things get everyone to a point of clarity and ownership. And he said that's the first thing we do before we do anything else, before we change anything, before we insist on those 2 things, which I just think is really interesting. Because if you're listening to this podcast and you're going, oh great, I'm busy running my business, and I'd say, well, okay, great. When was the last time you took your team off site, even for a 1-day off site? Because most people won't do that. And it's a massive investment, and I get that, but actually the payoff and the ROI is huge.
100%.
And number 2, do you have a strategic plan you're running your business by that shows what your current 90-day goals are, and what the two biggest or the 3 biggest things you're trying to get done that will have, I call them dominoes, but the 3 biggest dominoes you're doing. Most people don't have that. And yet somehow they have an expectation that they're going to be more successful next year than they were this year.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm always like, well, how?
Yeah. and it comes back to those 3 points again: purpose, where are we going, planning, and also within planning is everybody aligned to this? So in my group of companies, we don't do one-to-ones and we don't do appraisals. We have something called alignment reviews. Okay, which is, are you aligned with where we're going, and is what you're doing, is it giving you what you want? Is this what you want to do? But B, is this actually aligned to where we're going? And we've built a whole business around that. So those 3 elements: purpose.
So I'll just unpack that for a minute, because I think I remember you talking about, I've completely forgotten it. So I'm really glad you brought it up again, because I think you mentioned that CEO boardroom. But so just talk to me about that alignment meeting. Like, how does that run? Like, can you walk us through that? Because I think that's hugely valuable.
Yeah, I mean, so a 1-to-1 for a lot of businesses is often a reason for an employee to share all their problems and share their experience, share what's going on.
That's why most owners avoid them.
Yeah. And actually, it's very difficult. It's a real difficult one, this, because you absolutely want to know what's going on in your employee's life. But very often, 1-to-1s and appraisals are very often an opportunity for an employee really to discuss their personal life, discuss their issues, discuss what other employees are doing, and all that type of stuff. And actually, for the manager running it, it can be quite draining. If you've got a big team and you're doing lots and lots of 1-to-1s and you're doing it monthly, it's actually very, very
exhausting.
Actually, yeah, it is. And actually, I'm not quite sure what the outcome of that is. And I remember watching a video by the CEO of NVIDIA, and he said he's completely done away with 1-to-1s completely in his business now, and I completely get that. So I think for us is, look, if you've got personal issues, if you've got concerns, go and see our people development manager or HR manager in other companies.
Prefer people development manager, much healthier.
Yeah, and so go and see our people development manager. But actually, the purpose of this session is to say, right, here's your role, here's your KPIs, here's where we're going as a business. Do you think you're working in alignment with our business goals? Are your values aligned to our business goals? Is your purpose aligned to it? Is what you're working on aligned to it? And when you do that, and there's that level of focus, and everybody's doing it, and your whole team are doing it, you create a massive sense of alignment. Because one of the things that slows businesses down is that half the team are going in that direction, 20% are going in that direction, 20% are going in that direction, and they're all working with the best intentions, but they're pulling in different directions.
So true.
So to have that, pull all of that together so that you literally reinforce just a reminder of who we are. This is what we do. This is where we're going. This is why we're doing it. This is our purpose. And here's where we are along that journey. Are you fully aligned with that? Is everything that you're doing in your job aligned with that?
Yeah.
And if you do want to discuss other matters, then absolutely, go and see the people development manager.
Love that. Oh, that's really great. I think the other one distinction that I've had the clients do, which I think is really good, is that every quarterly sort of alignment meeting like that, there's a section where you list the values in the company, and they list how much they feel they're living in line with those values. And then they also list how well they think the company is living in line with those values, which is a really interesting piece of feedback to get from people. Because
I think, particularly in the entrepreneurial space, we're not building PLCs yet. And there's the idea that you want to be like a family business.
Yeah.
And you want to take care of your team. But the reality is, building a business, if you want to scale a business, then it really needs to operate like a football team rather than a family. Because in a football team, you're coaching them like crazy. You're driving them forward. You've got high expectations from them. You want A players in your team. And if they're not part of that team and contributing to that team in the same way, then you probably don't want them on your team. And the problem there is if you treat it like a family business, then the expectation is different, because, if you got members of your team who aren't quite up to the job, you'll put up.
Their family, you wouldn't get, you wouldn't transfer them, would you?
Exactly.
Let's put it that way, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I think culturally we tend to have a narrative that we're like a family here, we're like a family business. In reality, what you want to be is a sports team, and you want to coach your team well. You want high expectations for them.
Yeah.
And then you want to recruit people into that culture, and you want to start people to say, here's where we're going, here's the speed that we're operating at. That's the other thing about execution. So it's about speed as well. So that's how quickly we're running. That's my expectation of you. Do you think you'd be a good fit in that team?
Nice.
And that's really how we built the business. So
I want to pack a couple of things if I can, because it kind of intersects with something I was desperate to talk to you about around health and wellness, because we both share that passion. I think it's really interesting, because I think the difference between a sports team and a business team is that sports teams have off seasons, businesses don't.
Yeah.
So, when Simon Leslie owns a football club, Eastbourne Borough Football Club, and we had this conversation about rest and recovery. And I think, in the last CEO boardroom I ran, I went through. Most of the CEOs in that room were all struggling with rest and recovery, and they were all struggling with the guilt of if they took time off to recharge and recover. Yet, as a sports team, they put as much emphasis on rest and recovery, if not more, in certain times. And I think it was a really interesting, sort of Simon shared this in a really interesting insight, which was at different times of the year, you have to have different times of rest and recovery. So at the beginning of the season, you need less rest and recovery.
Yeah.
At the end of the season, you need more, because you're tired or you're more fatigued, and therefore you need more, and you're injured probably.
Yeah.
And I thought that's really interesting, because as business people, we don't tend to look at it through that lens. We don't think of ourselves as athletes, and you can't perform at peak all the time. There are different seasons and cycles, right? So you and I are big about health. If you're going to play the game of entrepreneurship, that health is a really important part of that.
Absolutely.
So when did you start to realize that was a critical thing to invest your time and money into? When did that become a priority for you?
Probably when I lost my business 20 years ago, because I didn't just lose the business at that point. I was really unhealthy. I was overweight, and that seriously impacts your ability to run a business. You need to be physically fit, healthy, and have a sharp mind if you're going to scale a business, because it's never ending, it's relentless, and you need to be in the best possible shape, just like a sports team or just like the military.
Yeah,
you've got to be in tip-top shape, and when you're physically in good shape, you're mentally in a better place. You're able to make better decisions.
100%.
And your resilience is stronger, and your ability to execute is much better when you're in really good shape. So I think that's really important. I think it's really missed in entrepreneurship, and it's not really about putting in 60-hour weeks or 70-hour weeks. It's about being as efficient as you possibly can in the hours that you're there, and as productive and laser focused as you can possibly be. Yep. The best way of doing that is to be in really good shape.
And how did you struggle with the guilt of taking time out to do that, to take a week out to recharge and reflect? I know you do that a lot now, but at the beginning, did you struggle with that?
Well, to be fair, I didn't at the start. And so I went on a process, and what I realized is the more time I focused on me, and the more effective I actually was in the business. And I had to make that change. I had to make that big change, which is it's not about the hours that you put in, it's about the effort you put into the hours that you're there.
Mm-hmm.
And what I realized is if I was in tip-top shape, I was far more productive in less hours than I was previously. So for me now, I take probably a week a month, or at least 3 or 4 days, and I go somewhere else. So I'll jump on a plane, and I'm still working, but it's a completely different environment.
Yeah.
And I find that, I've just come back from Mallorca, and I was there for 4 days, and I got more done in those 4 days in terms of my own productivity than I have done in the last 3 or 4 weeks. I think it's really, really important.
So what is some of your protocols or kind of like biohacking things that you do now that you found have made a really big difference?
Well, again, I've been on a journey with this because I went vegan in 2016.
Okay.
So, and actually I've been studying this now for years and years and years. And actually I've moved away from that. And I now focus more on protein rather than carbohydrates. So, so I'm back now after 8 or 9 years. I'm back now eating meat and fish. So I focus on protein and I take a lot of supplements. I'm probably a supplement addict, and go to the gym and weight training as well. So
it's important to weight train as well as cardio. I think people underestimate that.
Yeah, but I've got some good facilities at home. I've got a sauna at home, so I use a sauna
infrared
all the time. Infrared sauna.
Yeah, because I'm a big fan of infrared saunas. Like, what's been the benefit for you of using it?
Well, we talked about skin earlier.
Yeah.
The evidence suggests that it's good for your whole body, but it's really good for your skin. It's very good for your well-being.
Yep.
And I definitely think that. So as an individual, I'm less volatile than I used to be. So my ability to handle stress, therefore, is much greater. I'm very centered. So, I don't go off on tangents anymore. So I think for me, the combination of good healthcare, really good food, I will not touch processed food at all. I just don't. So, I can't remember the last time.
It makes shopping a lot easier if you go to a supermarket because you can avoid 7 out of 10 aisles completely. So there's no point in even going down it, right?
And I prefer to go to a good local butcher rather than supermarket. So I think really healthy eating. The problem with processed food, we don't really know what we're eating. And so I think...
but isn't it about, don't you think it's a performance mindset though?
Definitely.
I think the minute you adopt a performance mindset, so hydration being number one, drink enough water, point number one. Number two, exercise, definitely. Point number three, I mean, for me, infrared saunas have been really good for recovery.
Yes.
If I've had a very tough couple of days doing an event, or I'm in London, it's full on and it's lots of meetings and all that. If I can get home, get into an infrared sauna, even for half an hour, I just genuinely feel at a cellular level I get better sleep as a result of that kind of stuff.
They are small hacks. I mean, it was interesting. We were at an exhibition last week and my team were all exhausted. We were on the stand for 3 days. We were out in the evenings. We had the stand build up, stand take down at the end of it. So it was almost a week. And my team were absolutely exhausted on the Thursday. And I'm still bouncing. So, and they're half my age. So, that's not me. Like, look at me. This is very much a case of, look, these are the things that I'm doing.
Exactly that,
And over a period of time, it's not what you do for a short amount of time, it's what you do over the long run that matters. So you get compounding. And one of my favorite sayings is success compounds, and I think it's exactly the same physically and mentally as well. And the better you are taking care of yourself physically, the stronger your mind becomes, the more resilient you become, the more confident you become.
Yep.
And you get a higher level of certainty. So, one of the things I've suffered with for years and years and years was self-doubt. I constantly questioned myself.
Really?
And I think no matter where I've got in business, I've still, by the time I've come to execute, I have a moment of self-doubt. Is this the right thing? Are we doing the right thing? But since I've actually focused more on health and sauna and the gym and supplements and really healthy eating, since I've been doing all of that has worked much better. So I think it's really important as an entrepreneur because being an entrepreneur is a high stress environment most of the time.
It is, yeah.
And
it's full contact. You're playing a full contact sport.
Exactly right. That's exactly what you're doing. So, and it's relentless, and you end up on this wheel that is very difficult to get off, and also the people around you don't really understand it. So it might be your siblings, it might be your spouse, and so like we said earlier, it's quite a lonely place. And the best thing that you can do is to get yourself in tip-top shape, ready to handle it.
Well, it goes back to the point you made earlier, actually, about having a purpose, right? If your purpose is 5, 10, 15, 20 years, my purpose is now to, as much as anything, I want to stay in the game as long as I can stay playing the game, which means if I'm going to do that, then I know there was a really interesting limiting belief that got challenged for me, which is someone said to me, when did you buy the limiting belief that just because you get older means you have to get slower, fatter, and lethargic? And when did you buy that belief? And I was like, wow, that's a really interesting question. When did I buy that belief? And I just thought to myself, well, what if I ask a different question, which is, what if I can get fitter, stronger, and healthier as I get older? What if I ask that question? And then that's when my journey kind of started, going, okay, I've got to start looking at how that might work. And look, you do your own due diligence, you figure out your own protocols. There are some things that I am a massive fan of that a couple of my clients I think I'm mad about. That's fine. It's like, but I know if I'm putting myself in a high stress environment, like running, say, Scale Up Summit that you'll come to speak at, super excited for that, for a couple of days, then I'm going to go and I'm going to spend some time in an oxygen chamber the weekend before it, so that my body's super hydrated with oxygen. I know that will help me recover quicker from every day. I'm also going to go and have, some the infrared sauna stuff, because the infrared therapy, because that again is quicker. And I think there's so much evidence now about how many sports teams are using this. And I just go, as an entrepreneur, it's like, look, if energy is one of the currencies, isn't it? Money's one, energy's another.
Yeah.
And if you're not investing in your own health and wellness, I think there's three things. Like, invest in health and wellness, invest in educational mentoring, because you don't know what you don't know.
Absolutely.
Period, right? And then finally, invest in a network of people to be around. Invest time and money in being around great people who are going to challenge you, but also who are going to lift you up, and who are going to celebrate when you win. And I think those are the three things that if you're going to invest in only three things, invest in those three things.
Absolutely.
And for me, everything I'm trying to do with the businesses, I'm trying to build either help with the health and wellness stuff, definitely help with, giving you education, and also putting you in an environment where you invest in building your network. Because I think your network is one of the biggest investments you can make.
100%. I'll just come back to a point there as well. We generally think about entrepreneurship as a young person's game, and what we want to do is encourage young people into entrepreneurship. I equally think we should encourage older, more mature people into entrepreneurship as well. And your age is not a limiting factor. And nowadays people are living much later in life. And I was in Mallorca last week, and a gentleman came and sat next to me who had been out cycling, and he was 71 years old and he looked about 40. I just could not believe it. And he trains every day, he does weights every day, he runs a really successful business, and he's loving life. And so I think we've got to get rid of that idea that as you get older, then that you're less capable. And I think by dealing with that narrative, as you get older, because you're afraid maybe you're getting a little bit older, you take less risks. And I, and that's something I really feel strongly about. It doesn't matter what age you are. It doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter, as long as you get fit and you get healthy, then why can you not build an empire?
Ray Kroc was in his late 60s, wasn't he, when he started it? But I also think the other thing as well, my wife brought this up the other day. She said she sent me a link to watch, and it was talking about how the fact that the whole concept of retirement at 65 was built out of the idea of the Industrial Revolution, when you'd been in factories for years and years and years, and you would burn your body out, right? You would beat your body up. So actually it was wearing out at that point. Whereas we live in a world now with technology, AI, all of the tools that we have, which means that actually physically we're not wearing out. Right. So therefore we should be able to go for much longer than we used to go for.
Absolutely.
But there's a whole kind of shift on that. I want to get a couple of, before we wrap, because I could talk for you hours, but appreciate how busy you are. But just like, what's your take at the moment on AI? Because you're big into this kind of world, especially around marketing. So give me your top three kind of, what's your take on the market now, but also what's one thing that you think entrepreneurs need to be thinking about around AI and where it's heading?
Well, to answer that, I've got to go back a few years, because I started my career as a computer programmer. So right back in the day, so I was writing code when I was 14 or 15.
Okay.
So understanding that AI is really what we're talking about is machine learning.
Yes.
And I took on, in 2019, I took on a computer scientist who had a background in machine learning. So we were probably in AI and machine learning before, AI has been around for decades.
True.
So it's not a new thing. It's just because of the AI platforms that have emerged, suddenly it's available to everybody. But we were using machine learning back in 2019. But the impact of it, the one thing I don't know for certain is whatever I think today, tomorrow it'll be different. So one of the biggest challenges, I think, is a difficulty for businesses to plan ahead. We used to write 3-year plans. We used to write 5-year plans. It's impossible to do that now because the measurements that we use to build those plans out are no longer relevant. I think did it take the internet 7 or 8 years to reach 10 million users? I think the mobile phone took 3 years, and I think with ChatGPT it took 2 months.
Yep.
So the speed of change, and so I think the one thing businesses need is to be agile and ability to shift gear really, really quickly. And it's not just AI, because the other thing that is emerging now is offshoring as well, because a lot of companies now are setting up teams overseas as well.
100%.
So there's an undercurrent there that we're probably not talking about as well. So
I think it's a growth industry. I think it's booming at the minute. The amount of, I've got a friend of mine who's built an incredible business, and it's gone from like 3 overseas employees to nearly 100 in the space of 18 months. And the South Africa economy, for one, is like booming. Anything that's on the same time zone as ours. And I think the mix, I think there's a really perfect storm happening right now, which is the national insurance increases that came into effect in the UK. I was talking to a client the other day. That's costing them an extra £6,000 a month they've got to find. That's net margin. And they're going, we've got 2 choices. We either try and find it in growth, which is, going to take £30,000 a month extra, or we cut £6,000 of overhead. The easiest thing to look at is who can we either offshore, what roles can we offshore? And I think that and the technology at the same time is creating this perfect storm.
That's exactly right. And it really is. And that combination is disrupting the future of business and the future of life completely, how we live our lives over the next few years. I think it's really interesting with AI as well, because there's a component coming downstream now, which is quantum computing, and current all computing now lies in a microchip. That microchip is governed by its speed of performance. And it operates in ones and zeros. All digital operates in ones and zeros, doesn't matter what it is. Quantum computing removes that. And as a result of that, the speed of quantum computing is infinitely faster than the speed of current computing power and current microchips. So AI today is still limited by the chips that it's running on. Once you remove those chips once you remove that methodology and you apply quantum computing to it, then the game changes completely. So as much as we're focused on AI quite rightly now, I think what's coming downstream is scary, is very scary for a start, and very exciting, because it'll take AI to an infinitely new level.
Well, so one of the cool things, obviously we're dropping this podcast the week of Summit, which you're at. Obviously Carly, currently my AI guru, is talking. She's speaking about how to use practical way to use AI, which is great. But one of the gentlemen who's speaking on day 2 this year, I'm really excited about. Aidan Mellor's he's dialed into everything to do with robotics and where that's heading, and also the thing he was talking to me when I was chatting to him the other day about what he's sharing is really this really interesting point about the fact that we are already on the verge or in the process of the merging between tech and biology. We're already there. We just don't realize it yet. So he said, like, do you wear an Oura? I wear an Oura ring. There's lots of people wear the Whoop. He said that's the start of merging tech and human physiology. That's just the first version of it, where you're wearing it on it as opposed to it. And he said where that's heading in the next 3 to 5 years, and the amount. I mean, you know, I've used the glucose monitor as well.
I do as well.
Yeah, but and you're heading into a space where that stuff, you know, we're going to be constantly monitoring all of our functionalities, biometrics massive, and you know, down to what you eat, how it's affecting you, all of that. And actually the empowerment that gives us as people, but also entrepreneurs, to go, I can play this game for much longer. Therefore, even if I'm in my 50s or 60s, I can afford to take a risk, because if it doesn't work out, I've got time to recover. Because for me, I think the biggest reason most people in their 50s and 60s don't take big risks is because they're worried if it doesn't work out, they haven't got time to go again.
Absolutely.
And I think that's certainly helped me. And I'll be honest, that's helped me back on a couple of projects where I've gone, if this doesn't work out, it's going to take me 2 years to recover from that. And I haven't got another 5 years to go. Whereas now I'm going, well, hang on a second. If I'm going to be fit and healthy till I'm 85, I've actually got 3 more goes at this, at least, if not more.
Yeah. And this is the really exciting thing now. If you're 50 years old, you're thinking about the next 10 years. And now we need to start thinking about the next 20 or 30 years.
Yeah. Well, 50 is the new, 50 is the new 40, right? I mean, that's mentally, and you and I both talked before this. Just, can you just tell everybody, because you just got back from somewhere where you had quite a unique kind of test on everything in terms of Marbella. You go to a clinic.
Yeah, that's right.
Can you, because I'm fascinated by that. What did you have tested when you went there?
So it's called the Executive Health Clinic, and that's in Marbella. There's something similar in London called Preventicum, and it's very similar, where it's a preventative facility where they test you with the absolute state-of-the-art equipment. So you have every possible type of scan, MRI, your brain scans, heart scans, every organ scanned, MRIs, CT scans, blood, everything, absolutely everything. And then they send it all to a lab. And I mean, to give you an idea, the brain scan, they send off to have an AI analysed, and it comes back and predicts the likelihood of you having Alzheimer's, and if you are going to get it, when you're going to get it.
Wow.
So it's really, really powerful stuff. But it analyzes your entire body from top to bottom, checks you for all possible diseases, or most possible diseases, and then comes back and makes recommendations, because no two people are the same. So it comes back with recommendations in terms of what you're low on, what you're high on, what you need to manage, what you need to moderate. So and I've been doing this for, I think the first time was probably 6-7 years ago.
Really?
Yeah. So I go once a year.
You're way ahead of the curve on that one then.
Yeah. And I think it's really, really important. And it also flags up areas that you think, right, I've got to deal with that. I've got to get fitter, I've got to get healthier, or I've got to cut back on that. Or, I think it's really, really powerful.
Love it. So I'm going to ask you a few questions just before we wrap up, if that's all right. Just a few of my favorites. So what do most business owners misunderstand about building a legacy instead of chasing quick wins? What do you think most of them misunderstand about what it takes?
Great question. Well, it'll always come back to purpose for me. So if you're building a legacy, you're not building a company actually you could build a company to sell it, and it could still be a legacy. So in my businesses, that would be about brand. So I want to build a business that is recognized long after I'm gone, and is still of value long after I'm gone, and is providing value. So I think legacy to me is probably about providing value long after you've finished with it.
Okay. How important is, just to build on that, how important is building a brand if you want to sell the business at some point?
Well,
how much is it worth, do you think?
So there are 5 or 6 levers that will increase the value of a business. And I would say your brand is probably right up there at the top. So to give you an idea, when I sold Business Leader, the buyer paid although I can't disclose the numbers, the multiple was 32, which is extremely high.
Incredibly high.
And that was based on the brand value and the reputation of the magazine. So the stronger your brand, the higher the multiple will always be, because the more desirable the business is. And when you got a business that's got a strong brand, you attract repeat customers, and you have your customers become fans, and all of that increases the value of the business.
So if I'm a business owner listening to this podcast, this conversation, I go, okay, Brent, what are the 3 things I should invest in from your perspective that will add the most value from a brand perspective? What are the 3 things you think?
It would be systems and processes to enable the business to run without the CEO. So you need to be able to evidence everything you're doing in the business. You need to look at every metric in the business. You need to be able to operate the business without the CEO being there. So
that just shocked the hell out of me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I thought you'd start with like website marketing. Yeah, I didn't think you'd start with that.
Yeah, because and it's very difficult to create predictability in a business where you don't know the metrics in it.
Yep.
So for a buyer to come in, they're looking at it and saying, how do I scale this business? How do I grow this business? If you haven't got any of the data, you can't do that.
Okay.
And at the same time, it's not just about the metrics; it's how you actually run the business, your systems and processes, to enable it. So
that's one.
That's the first thing. The second is a senior leadership team, which I guess is a continuation of that. Is to develop a senior leadership team that can then take the business forward.
100%.
And then the third thing for me would always be brand, and the most important thing for me would be to build a brand and reputation.
So when you say that, do you mean external facing assets like the website? The when you say that, what do you mean?
Yeah, so so they're logos or their devices, but the brand really is recognition and reputation, a combination of that. So how well recognized is the business or the product or the service,
right?
And then alongside it, it's really recognition and reputation. So if you've got an iPhone, and you're up for renewal, you'll nearly always go and buy another iPhone because the recognition of, because the reputation of it, familiarity with it as well would be in amongst that mix as well. So if you've got a business that is valuable because of it's extremely well known, it's got highly recognized, and it's also got a great reputation, you understand exactly what it does, exactly how it operates, you know exactly what it means.
Yeah.
And there's that doesn't mean that it has to be a premium either, because McDonald's is a great brand. So you can have budget brands, you can have premium brands. So it doesn't matter where you're positioned on that. All that matters is in that area that you're highly recognized, and people understand what it is you do and why you do it. And so recognition, reputation, and when you've got that, and you've got the systems in place and the accountability within the business, and you've got a strong leadership team, that makes a highly desirable acquisition for someone.
Love that. So talking about that, what was the most surprising thing you learned about doing a deal with a billionaire?
There are several. I actually really enjoyed the process because it's not every day. I mean, it was interesting. Through Business Leader, I got to meet and work with several billionaires and multi-millionaires and celebrities and, hedge fund managers. I mean, it was an incredible experience living in that world and building friendships amongst that. So, the person that bought Business Leader off me knew me previously. We'd been working together. He had been one of our judges at the Business Leader Awards.
Oh, right.
He was also a guest speaker at some of my events, so I'd got to know him personally, and he got to know me. So that makes a big difference. And actually, when you sell a business or when you plan a business to exit, it's always a good idea to have an idea in mind of what sort of person or organization is likely to buy it, and actually build a business towards that market. But the experience on that process is that the speed at which they move is insane.
Really?
Yeah, because they don't have time to faff around, because they're doing deals all over the place. So I want it now. And what they do is bring in the best of the best in terms of their advisors. So the scrutiny they do is at a higher level than I've experienced before, but that's because they pay for the best people, they pay for the best lawyers, the best accountants, best of everything. And so understanding that your business will be scrutinized at a really insane level, because the best people from the other side are going to be working on
That's
it.
a great insight.
And your guy
That's a great insight.
Your guy probably isn't a match for the lawyers on the other side, because it's a different league.
Yeah.
A billionaire or large corporation will pay significantly for the legal advice and financial advice, whereas you're trying to do it on a budget. So you got to understand that. And then most importantly is the speed they operate. When they ask for something, they want it now. You can't go away and find it. So you've got to have the information available. And what I would say is, if there's any skeletons in the closet, they will absolutely find them as well. So, because they leave no stone unturned.
That's a great insight.
I think also as well is that they, in my case anyway, I was then invited to stay on the board and be a board advisor as well. So an experience for me was an expectation. You're acquiring this business and you're going to build that business in the same way that I was building it. What actually happened is they bought the business and changed it enormously, because they put in resources that I could never have imagined or could ever have funded personally.
Right.
In terms of the board put in the best of the best. They employed the very best people as new CEO, new financials, new directors.
When you were sitting through that, was that exciting to watch, or did you feel like, oh, I wish I could have done that?
It was very much, even now I have not regrets, pings every now and just thinking, God, look at it now. I mean, that business has transformed. It had a complete rebrand, reposition in the market, and things that I would not have done, but they've done that, and I understand why they're doing it, and it's definitely a long-term play as well. So they've invested in it at an extraordinary level, at a level that I could never have done, and that even very successful and wealthy people would probably not have invested at the level that's going on at the minute. So that has been really insightful. And the other element to that is that at that level they don't want to build anything. So their idea, what they wanted, they acquired the business and they immediately bought 2 or 3 other businesses to bolt onto the side of that.
Oh, really?
And which was absolutely fascinating. So rather than saying, right, let's launch X, Y, and Z. So, let's launch a new podcast, for example. I said, no, we'll just go out and buy one. Well, right, what do we need a membership organization? Let's not build one. We'll just go out and buy one. So that was their approach.
Speed.
Yeah. All right. And, I've always said in business, speed wins. And certainly when you're working with somebody at that level, it's 100%, because I need to get it done. I need to get it done now. I don't have time to build, so we just buy and bolt that. We'll take A, B, and C. We'll put them together and make something bigger, and then we'll put in A players, the best in the business, to run them, and that's exactly how they operate. So it's been fascinating to watch. Yeah, really fascinating.
That's a really interesting insight into that world.
Yeah, and I still get to. I'm still a minority shareholder in Business Leader. And I meet with Richard every now and then, or we have a call together, and I always leave inspired, because he cuts through the conversation, he cuts through everything, he gets straight to the point. He can just amazingly spot the point and get to it straight away, and then said, right, that's it. Your 15 minutes is up and off you go.
Your time is up. Goodbye. Yeah,
that's it. So that's been a great experience, actually.
So obviously you've got a book coming out. Called Imposter Millionaire.
Yeah.
When's that? When did you out? Do you know roughly when it's coming out?
Hopefully September.
Yeah.
So I'm working through some finishing touches on that.
I'm really excited for that book. What do you want it to unlock in readers? What are you trying to get them to unlock with that?
Yeah. The most important thing for me is that no matter how tough it gets, there's always hope and there's always tomorrow. And business, sometimes you're down, sometimes you're up. It is like a game, but it's a game that never ends. So there's always somebody you're competing with. There's always another side, and the key is to keep going. And when you do fall over, get back up again and go. And it doesn't matter if you're young or old. There's always a new tomorrow.
Yeah.
And there's always hope. And we've got to remove limiting beliefs. And I think particularly if you've got a challenging background, your idea of building a big business can be quite alien. And, you may think, I don't deserve it. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy of it. But actually the opposite's the case. With that sort of background, I think it gives you an advantage because you want to fight more for it and you're more determined because of it and you want to be somebody because of it. So I think the book really is about hope and about sharing my experiences and also sharing the strategies that I've used to scale small businesses into bigger businesses. And actually, if you do fail, you just get yourself back up and off you go again.
So what would be your final piece of advice for somebody wanting to think big and build a grown-up business? What would be like? What's the mindset shift, and maybe how do they deal with the self-doubt that they might be having?
The number one factor that holds people back is fear. What if it goes wrong? What if I'm not good enough? What if this happens? What if that happens? So an ability to understand that that's what's holding you back, and to understand that, any business system, very often I'll meet an entrepreneur and they'll say, I want to go from 10 million to 12 million. And I'll say, well, why don't we go from 10 to 100? And the response is nearly always the same. I can't visualize myself running a business like that. That's like an impossible dream. Well, what if you could visualize yourself being that? What would your business look like if it was 100 million? And so I think visualization, I think nowadays everybody's using the phrase manifestation, aren't they? But I think if you can visualize it, you can reach it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you ended there, because I think perfect segue, because obviously we've got an amazing speaker on at Summit who has just written a book all about visualization. And she's actually written the book on it, and there are 5 different types of visualization that you can do. Yeah. And she also breaks down in that the difference, and we're going to have her on the podcast to talk about this, but the difference between visualization and manifestation, they're actually very different. Yes. They're actually, and they get mixed up, right. But visualization is used by athletes to improve performance. And fundamentally, in the book, Maya's an amazing speaker, 27, she's mindset coach for Nike in the UK, right? So she's going to be talking at Summit, and really super excited to have her share that. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to finish the Scale Up Summit this year with about the visualization. Interestingly, and I didn't tell you that, you didn't know that. So you're kicking it off. It's kind of all about the kind of think possibility. And I think it's really interesting because I've been in 2 or 3 rooms recently with clients where the number 100 million keeps coming up. Yeah. So I'm like, oh, that's interesting. If we can normalize in the UK entrepreneurs thinking about, well, what if I could build 100 million pounds? In America, that's a normalization. They're like, well, yeah, of course, right? It's America. Whereas in this country, it's like, yeah, but why not, right? You are a global brand right now. Yeah. Today, you're a global brand. You're in a global economy. Stop thinking local, start thinking global.
I think that's really important. I think, and that was a journey that I went on when I pivoted business leader, and then we started working with US brands and speakers, etc. And I think in the UK, our mentality, if we're going to open up a shoe shop, we'll open up one shoe shop. In the USA, they say, how do we open up 1,000 shoe shops?
Yes.
So that mentality is really different, and I think we've got to change that.
Yeah.
And we've got to make entrepreneurs rock stars in this country, and realise that you can build a big company. And the UK represents less than 1% of the global market, 1% of the global population. But because we're an island nation, we're too constrained with how we see our market. So I think when you realise that the UK is less than 1% of global population, you realise what could be possible.
Yeah.
And actually you can scale a business internationally.
Yeah.
So and in this country, we haven't got a Google, we haven't got an Amazon, we haven't built those sorts of companies, we haven't built a Microsoft. So it's time that we did. It's time we started building big global brands and build them from the UK.
I love that. Love that. That is thinking big, and that is what you're all about. And listen, thank you for sharing, and thank you for giving up so much of your time. Brilliant. Super excited to have you. For all of those of you who are lucky enough to be in the room at Scale Up Summit, you're going to love hearing more from Andrew. Yeah. Thank you for being on the Grown Up Business Podcast today.
I can't wait. I'm so looking forward to the summit.
It's been a privilege. Thanks for having me. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Cheers. that concludes this episode of the Grown Up Business Podcast. I hope that got you fired up and ready to grow. The key thing, though, is to remember you get paid on what you get done. So write down the top 3 actions from this show and make sure that you implement those in the next 72 hours. Hey, and while you're at it, make sure you click the links and the resources below this episode to claim free growth resources to help you build the business you desire and deserve. I'll see you on the next episode.